Hey listeners, this is Dan Pigsley, host of the Ricecast. This is a different podcast this week as it will play in two different parts. Unfortunately, Pastor Willie and I didn't realize that our podcast equipment had suffered a little bit of damage. Don't know how, don't know why, but it did happen. So my voice is a little bit harder to hear this week, and then about 35 minutes into Pastor Willie and I having a conversation, our equipment completely failed. So you will have this conversation that Pastor Willie and I have will play out in two parts. So this week it will be a little bit of an abrupt ending, but we will pick it back up next week as long as our equipment gets fixed or we get some new equipment into the office. But I just wanted to pause for a moment and thank you for being a listener. Thank you for just your continued thoughts and prayers as we continue to do ministry here at Calvary. And I would even call those of you who do not go to church, man, try a Calvary campus out this coming weekend. Whether you are up in Crystal Beach or in the East Lake area or here in Clearwater or even in our newest campus, Safety Harbor, or down with me all the way down here in South in Seminole, I would encourage you, come and check us out here at Calvary. Come and worship with us this weekend as we look to continue to pursue peace with God and peace with others as we look to build relationships that lead people to dynamic life in Christ. We know that you are loved and we are so thankful for you, and I hope you enjoy part one of this two-part podcast. Welcome to the Ricecast. I'm your host, Dan Pigsley, and as always, sitting across from me is my friend and yours, Pastor Willie Rice. Pastor, how are you today?
Doing great.
Good. Have a good weekend?
Yes, great weekend at Calvary. Just seemed like a great weekend and a lot going on here.
Yeah.
So, I guess now we know who's in the Super Bowl. That happened this Sunday afternoon. I wasn't really who I was pulling for, but anyway, got friends who are Philadelphia and Kansas City people.
Yeah.
So that's moving along. It's been cold. Now it's warming up this week in Florida. It's starting to feel like Clearwater weather. So
yep.
all the stuff is moving in the right direction.
Oh, I think we're in the right direction there. Everything, all the campuses are doing well. It's just a great weekend. Looking forward to this weekend too. Big weekend for Calvary, baptism weekend. We'll talk a little bit more about that next week. Just to celebrate what the Lord does. We know He's got incredible plans for us this weekend as we just celebrate life change here at all of our Calvary campuses. So excited to see what the Lord does there, hear from other campus pastors.
Yeah, we are. I'd just like to say we're very excited about the baptism weekend.
Yeah.
And, if you're out there and you need to first of all, this is an opportunity for us to call people to make commitments to Christ.
Yeah.
That's the biggest and mostly an opportunity. And so we're going to do that. It's always a great weekend. Mm-hmm. There are always people who have made a commitment to Christ. They have come to a place of faith, but maybe they, for whatever reason, haven't taken the step of baptism, or they were in a tradition where they did baptism in a way that is not explicitly biblical. Maybe, I'm talking about child baptism here. They were baptized before their conversion, and they, for whatever reason, feel, that they haven't done that the right way, and they want to do it the right way. So this is an opportunity for people to be biblically baptized, and we do that every Sunday, but we look forward to a great Sunday this Sunday.
It's going to be great. So what I want to do today, Pastor, so we're 10 days into President Trump, being in office, and I know we kind of had a conversation. We seem to be talking about it a lot, but a lot of stuff's happening in the world.
Well, it's a historical season, and we don't. This is not a political podcast, but we do sometimes want to talk about politics where it intersects with our life and faith.
Right, and what I want to talk about today, I think it truly does. I think there's a movement going on. It's been going on for years, but President Trump is pretty opposed to it, and he's been signing some executive orders on the DIE initiative.
Yep.
DEI. I always say DIE.
That's the wrong one. DEI.
Yeah. And then he has a lot of policies on immigration issues as well. So if you're fine with that, I would love to kind of tackle that today.
It's a deep dive, but it is a great topic because, there has been a flurry of activity in the first week and a half. And this is what President Trump ran on. He was very, he has done a lot of what he said he was going to do. I don't think anybody even his worst critics could say, "Oh, you didn't tell us you're going to do this."
Right.
He has been going hard, and DEI, which stands for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion initiatives, which have become kind of part and parcel of American life in the last couple of years. I mean, mainstream companies, Walmart, Target, universities, and so forth, all had or did have DEI departments or initiatives. And he has come in, military, United States military, and just signed a flurry of executive orders that basically opposes that, where they are able to, as the government, they have ended it, and in the military and so forth, saying this is going to end, full stop. This has led to a ripple across the American culture in many of these companies that had these things that are now saying, okay, we're going to stop.
Yeah.
And a lot of universities had DEI departments. We're going to stop. And one of President Trump's first orders was last week that by Wednesday, he was inaugurated on Monday, and if I'm right on my numbers, by Wednesday on the 2 days later, whatever it was, he was inaugurated on Monday, the next Wednesday, 20th. These departments, these government employees would be furloughed. They'd be sent home on paid leave. In other words, their departments, their jobs would over. And I think the reason he did that is because he couldn't fire them legally, but he could just say, hey, you don't have a job anymore, so we'll figure out what to do with you.
Yep.
So that's a big one. And then, of course, the immigration issue, which is something he has run on, is something that has divided at least institutional Christians, and I would even say sometimes biblical Christians who are struggling with biblical values. And we get asked this from time to time. How do I process this? It's like a clash of values. And so we can feel very strongly, but how do we think about these things? And this isn't going away. President Trump has signaled a massive change in the cultural landscape. And we don't yet know if this is a change, or it is a change that will be unchanged, by another administration or within a few years. Is this a cultural moment where the tide has shifted, or is it just one more political battle in many ongoing political battles?
When you have obviously you have two major parties here in America, and you had really President Trump running on kind of getting away from this line of thinking, and then you had the Democratic Party kind of jumping in with 2 feet on this way of thinking.
Doubling down.
They really did, and I think you saw kind of where the country really feels like we should be going, because when you double down on something like this, you get into some really just crazy philosophies and really just different way of thinking. That's almost it just doesn't make sense, to the thinking person.
Yeah, right there, and you're talking specifically about the DEI issues,
right?
And you're exactly right. The Democratic Party doubled down on this. This was like who they were, and a big part of the Biden administration. Trump on the other side of that, and but what's interesting is for me to see how many universities, secular universities, again, people like Target, who just a few years ago were in the news because of the over-the-top displays during Pride Month, June, and so many companies like that saying we're ending that, and so does that shift? Does Trump's victory signal a shift in popular thinking, not just a shift in government policy,
right?
But has this particular fever broken, and is the culture shifting back toward a more maybe a centrist view? Some would say a more conservative view, but I'm not sure yet you could even say it's a conservative view. It's particularly on the LGBTQ issues, you're talking about a more centrist view, even if it's not yet a conservative view.
Well, you have these terms, so it's DEI, not DIE, in case anybody wants to send me an email later and correct me. But you have, the terms diversity, equity, and inclusion. These are not evil terms. These are actually good things. And it just, I talk to Christians my age and even younger, and they really struggle with this. Like, this seems good, so what's the problem?
Yeah,
right?
We've been conditioned, those words now. As it's become controversial, those words have become more problematic. But the concepts for at least a long time seemed innocuous enough on one side and maybe even positive to others. Diversity seems like, hey, we're leaning into diversity. We want to make sure diverse cultures in America have equal opportunities and So diversity didn't seem that bad. And equity sounds good. It's related to the word equality, but it's different, and it's different in some meaningful ways.
Mm-hmm.
And inclusion means, hey, that sounds nice. We want everybody to be included. But what happened in the reason this really deals with your theological worldview is the idea of, hey, we want to make sure everyone has equal opportunities in American life. Again, seems like a good idea. Mm-hmm. And obviously, a lot of those movements go back even more than a generation to the civil rights movement, mm-hmm. where obviously our culture came to grips with very real elements of discrimination. And yes, words like systemic and structural discrimination, there were systems of discrimination. Mm-hmm. I've talked to people who can remember living in Clearwater in those days, and black people went to one part of the beach and white people went to the other, and all those kinds of things, as we've all seen. So to say that was not present in American society is to ignore history, and not all too distant history. Mm-hmm. So there were all kinds of movements in the latter part of the 20th century to correct that, almost like someone with a corrective limp needs a brace, there has been discrimination, so now let's employ a type of discrimination, in a sense, to correct the other discrimination. Mm-hmm. Let's make sure that people have a fair shot and are equally represented. What really killed, if in fact it is dead, and again, we have to see that yet. It's too hard to tell. Yeah, I don't know. Right. Is this a cultural change?
We're 10 days in.
There does seem to be a cultural shift happening. Yeah. But, we'll have to see. And as I heard somebody say the other day, Dr. Moeller on a podcast, he said, some people will just change the letters and then they'll go do the same thing. They'll just kind of hide the ball. Yeah. And that also happens. So we got to watch and see if there's a real change or just kind of a superficial change. But you know what I don't know that you would even to this day have as massive a problem with some of the DEI initiatives if you were only talking about race. Yeah. Now, that's an opinion. Some would still say, no, we would have major problems, and I get that. We can talk about those problems. But I think what really changed it is when you began to include the sexual identity issue, and I'm talking here about the LGBTQ Rainbow Revolution, into those DEI initiatives. Right. We began to see all kinds of identities, including sexual identities, and it's in not only that, but particularly the transgender ideology. As someone said in an article recently, the negative world, the moral shift was fueled by the sexual revolution, but it may be undone by the transgender ideology. Almost as if the political left and the cultural left overplayed its hand. And in the transgender issue, causing many people who do not identify as, certainly they're not conservative Christians, right, biblical Christians, and they may not even consider themselves political conservatives. Mm-hmm. Some of them didn't even consider themselves political moderates. Mm-hmm. They would have considered themselves to the left of center. But people as diverse as J.K. Rowling, who's, of course, in England, certainly she's not a Christian, to my knowledge, at least as we would understand that, and she's not a conservative by any stretch of the imagination. Dave Chappelle, the comedian, again, it doesn't appear that Dave Chappelle is a Bible-believing Christian. Mm-hmm. Elon Musk. We're talking about people who are not conservatives. They're not Christian conservatives. Mm-hmm. But all of whom at least would say, I'm not buying that. Mm-hmm. I'm not buying that men can become pregnant. I'm not buying there's more than two genders. They had and I would say they had the courage to say the truth in a time when it was unpopular to say the truth, and to expose a kind of Orwellian language speak, which, if you're familiar with the books, sometimes people use language to say the exact opposite of what they're doing. It just, you change words, you change meanings, and you can't say certain things. You have to say certain things. And I think there's just so many people who finally said, no, we're not going there. Yeah. And particularly, I think, when you preyed upon children, when it went beyond what an adult wants to do, we've all understood there are always people that have, whether you want to call it a spiritual deception or a behavioral disorder or a little of that in gender dysphoria, there's always been a small number of people that deal with that. And most of the time, for most of human history, just like, who cares? That was not in the mainstream of thought. But now it wasn't just accepting the idea of transgenderism. It was pushing it on children. It was teaching it to children. It was suggesting it to children. We saw videos of parents coaching children. And then, of course, actually having gender-altering surgeries among prepubescent or adolescent children. Drugs were being given. And I just think we are seeing a cultural moment where people are saying, no more. And I, for one, welcome it, and I am grateful for it. And the fact that that became embedded in DEI initiatives, I think, is one of the reasons it has been, I don't know if it has been killed, but it is being killed because it just overplayed its hands. So while we obviously want to condemn discriminating against people like on the basis of race or ethnicity, and that has been a value in American culture that has been enunciated now for many decades. And that is a good and right understanding. But to stretch that beyond to talk about sexual identities, to stretch that beyond and to talk about all kinds of other identities, and also to suggest that the way in which you solve past discrimination is to engage in future discrimination is an idea that I think should be rejected. In fact, we just preached on James about the sin of partiality or favoritism, and I think that is an example of the sin of favoritism. And I had a quote that actually, I don't know if I used it in every, and I don't think I attributed it to him because I just didn't want all the hubbub. Sunday, but I actually slid it into my message. It was actually in an opinion written by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts, a few years ago. And it was in a case on more of the affirmative action programs. But the statement was, you cannot end racial discrimination by continuing to practice racial discrimination. He said, the way to quit discriminating on the basis of race, this is the exact quote, the way to end discriminating on the basis of race is to quit discriminating on the basis of race. And again, he's not some, right-wing rabble-rouser. John Roberts is like a moderate conservative judge. But it's hard to argue that what he is saying is not the truth. And even if at a certain point in time you realize we need to engage in some corrective behaviors to overcome discrimination, at some point isn't the goal to not discriminate on the basis of a race. And this is the problem with DEI, even if it were just applied to race. And so what you had in the American culture is all these programs and all these corporations, and then you had people like the human rights groups, which are high left-wing groups, giving people grades on how good your company is at this. And ultimately, I think the American people see it as fundamentally unfair, but more than that, dangerous. Dangerous. Like, if I get on an airplane, who do I want to be my pilot? Do I want a black person, a white person, a Hispanic person, an Asian person? Do I want somebody in their 50s, somebody in their 20s? Do I care? Do I care who they're sleeping with? I do as a Christian. I certainly do. But no. I want your best pilot. I want the guy who passed the test and got the highest score. And I don't want to know that he's there because of some, push to put people in there because of their sexual identity or even their racial identity. And in the end, we get someone who's less qualified than not. It's not fair to the more qualified person, regardless of their race, and frankly, regardless of the past. And not only is it just simply unjust, it's dangerous at some point. You're going to get bad results at some point. So this is why I am grateful. We've talked in the past. I get it. You talk about politics, prepare to duck. People are going to get angry. We're trying to have a very fair, balanced conversation here. I know everyone's not going to agree with me. But and we've said in the past, Donald Trump is a very complicated political figure, but he has now become a political figure that is titanic in his influence, just the way things have worked out. It may be a generational kind of influence. But I am grateful that he is taking on these DEI programs. I'm particularly grateful he's eliminating from the military.
Yes.
I was very concerned about the military. The military has always been one of those merit-based, or at least for many, many years. Always, that might be too strong a term. But since the Civil Rights Movement, it's certainly a merit-based organization, and that is what you want. I'm not interested in a military with how many women do you have, how many of this sexual identity do you have, how many of this race do you have. When it comes to protecting the rights of Americans, and if you have to go into battle, I want to know one thing. Do you have the biggest, baddest dudes who can get the job done?
Right.
Because the job of the military, is to blow stuff up and to kill people. Now, I know that sounds harsh. I don't rejoice in that because I believe, like Ronald Reagan believed, and I think this president believed, that the stronger the military is on the front end, the less likely it is that you will engage in unnecessary wars. I actually believe history has borne that out to be true. So we want the strongest, I want the best guys in those positions. And the DEI philosophy, I think, I know this because I've talked to guys in the military. It really affected the morale of the military. And they have to follow orders, but there were some guys who were really concerned about where the military was going, and that's where you can lose your country.
Right.
That's right. So anyway, I'm rambling on there, but I do, the idea of diversity, equity sounds like a good word, isn't it? But and here's a line I say that maybe sounds controversial, and maybe somebody can punch back. That's fine. I've always said equality is overrated.
Okay.
Which sounds deeply offensive.
Yeah. Unpack that for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Equality, again, we are conditioned to think that is a good thing. And here's why. Because we certainly believe in the value of equal justice under the law. That's an American value, and I think it's an American value because it's a Judeo-Christian value.
Yes.
That we treat people fairly. That's inherent in the idea of justice, that everyone gets treated fairly. There's equal justice under the law. And let me say, we are 1,000% for that. Okay. You are always going to be working for that in an imperfect culture. No culture is going to get it right every time. But you should, justice is pictured as a statue of a lady with a blindfold on because we want equal justice under the law. But equity and equality are two different things. And let me just stick on the equality thing just a minute. I don't want a world of perfect equality. And here's what I mean by that. If everybody is equal, then nobody is excellent.
Okay.
And what we should want is excellence. For instance, in the NBA, there are far more black players than white players or any other race of players, a few Asian players. I don't know why. Don't ask me why. That's a conversation if you get into, even if you speculate on, you get into trouble. I don't know why. I really don't know why. What if we said, hey, we demand equality? Like you have to have, this number of people from a European background, this number of people from an Asian background. You know what you would have? You would have basketball that is not as good.
Right.
The one thing, who's the best basketball player? If no one in the world is a better basketball player than me, then no one is going to be interested in paying to see basketball. I promise you that.
Maybe one time.
No time. If there is no one in the world that's a better artist than me, the world's going to be a boring place. If there's no one in the world that's a better painter than me, the world is going to be an uglier place. Maybe I do some things better than other people do, whatever, who knows, I'll let others decide that. But there are many things that I am grateful for a world in which people do it better than me because it adds value to my world. What I think we should want in a free society is people to be able to rise to their level of excellence and achievement. And you don't get that by insisting on equality. You get that by allowing excellence. And excellence benefits everyone else. And so when you look at Marxist worldviews, that's based on equality. We want everyone to have the same amount and the same outcomes. Free societies are free, which means let's let people rise to their level of excellence. They will be rewarded. They will get more money. There are people, I know you may not know this, Dan. There are people that make a lot more money than you or I, right?
News
right.
to me.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
Elon Musk has more money than you or I. Put together.
A couple times
Put together, right? Beyonce makes a lot more money than you or me. LeBron James makes a lot more money than you or me. And in a free society, we don't resent that.
Right.
We accept that. Even if you go, I wouldn't pay for that. Well, you don't have to pay to see Beyonce. She doesn't make any money off me. I can assure you that. It's not my thing. So she doesn't make any money off of me. I'm not sure LeBron James is making money off of me. I don't watch NBA all that much. But somebody's paying for it, and it's okay. I'm not insisting on equality. So when in the name of justice you insist on equality, if what you are talking about is the equality of outcomes, that is fundamentally different than the equality of opportunity.
There it is, yeah.
And so if you're talking about the equality of opportunity, bang.
Yep.
Look, I have the opportunity to play basketball as much as LeBron James did, right? I could have tried out. Yep. I could have played. I could have tried out. It wouldn't have gone well. Equality of opportunity is fine. If you are trying to guarantee the equality of outcomes, now you got a problem.
Right.
And that's where equity tends to come in, because equity is not equality. Equity means this person has as much power. Equity is about outcomes and power more than opportunity.
Yes.
And so I would argue simply this: DEI hurts everyone. It doesn't just hurt a majoritarian culture; it hurts the minority culture. It hurts everybody, and it enforces mediocrity instead of allowing for excellence.
Yeah, I think it's a great word. A lot of words, but a great word, because that's where we're at, I think, in society is DEI, what it has done. I love that you hit it, because I've said this to my wife a couple times. What you have end up seeing in our country is the pursuit of excellence has always been, preached to our kids, preached to ourselves. And what has now happened is the pursuit of excellence is now stifled by this equity or equality, whatever you want, however you want to call it. And now, in order to get excellent at anything, you've got to work your tail off. But now you have put a ceiling on that, and I can't get past that.
Exactly.
And that's dangerous.
You've opted for mediocrity rather than excellence, and you end up hurting everyone.
Everybody.
And so so this is where it gets tricky. When we read passages like we did in James last week, we want equality in the sense that everyone matters to God.
Yes.
In the kingdom of God, even James says this: the rich man should not boast in his wealth. The Bible would say to Elon Musk, you know what? There's only one way for you to be saved: to repent of your sin and be saved. And don't boast in your wealth, because it ain't lasting that long.
Right.
And you better use it for good, because you're going to answer to God for it.
The address to Clearwater.
And the address, yes, please. And so James says to rich people, here's what you need to know.
Right.
You need to be, don't trust in worldly wealth, and be rich in good deeds and ready to share. I would say that. To the poor person, the Bible offers hope that, this world is not all there is. We do the best we can. We work hard. We put our future in the hands of God. And if you don't have as much as somebody else, that isn't necessarily at your expense. And you don't make one person rich by making another person poor.
Right.
So this is where we tend to disagree with the liberal economic political philosophy, all the way into Marxism. I'm not saying every person on the left is a Marxist, but this idea of Marxism is equality. And Marxism focused on economic equality. What happened in the LGBTQ revelation is you co-opted Marxist ideas, but it wasn't so much about materialism anymore. You weren't measuring people by how much money they made or owned. You were measuring them by their social power and social acceptance. So that, let's say, a black lesbian professor in the Ivy League making, $250,000 could be considered oppressed, but an Appalachian man living in a trailer on welfare could be considered the oppressor. Had nothing to do with money, because now our focus was on identity and power politics.
Right. Well, and it kind of leads me to my next question. I think it does kind of fall in, because we want everyone to be treated equally. But then you have President Trump also with the immigration policies. Like, there's a lot to unpack there as well. So this will be a little bit longer of a podcast, I feel like, but I want to unpack that as well with everything we just talked about, because now we're seeing, people who are here illegally deported, reading, a lot of articles like going into jails, like anyone who's there illegally, sending them back to their country. I don't know if you saw that video of that guy getting sent back to Haiti.
I saw one video.
Yeah, he was getting put in the
car.
He
was mad.
He was getting Biden forever.
Yeah, he was talking about that.
So, but I just unpack that for in the concept of equality. How does that fit into our Christian worldview?
Yeah, it really does, because it does seem like a clash of values. And but I'm not just going to grab a political banner and wave it here. I just want to lean in and understand that there are people who feel strongly in different ways on this. Because there is the value, let's acknowledge this. There is a strong value in, first of all, how we treat the poor. Mm-hmm. That is a Christian value. We should show compassion to the poor and work for, justice in the sense that we treat people the way God would want them to be treated. Mm-hmm. Justice isn't defined as equity. That's but we've already kind of covered that.
Yeah.
But how they are treated righteously, fairly. Of course, we want, and more than that, as Christians, we want to show compassion. Mm-hmm. More than that, the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, has several passages that talk about how we would treat people who are aliens in the land and foreigners, and would speak against any kind of discrimination or hardship or mistreatment of other individuals. So that is a very real value. It's not being soft or squishy. That is a solid Christian value. How do we treat, as Jesus said in the book of Matthew, the least of these?
Yeah.
Okay. And then there is also a very strong value of law and order, of government being able to enforce the laws, and that government should enforce the laws, and that this is the role of government. And there is a role for governments. There is a role for nations, and that there are good laws. I mean, the reason there are borders is because a border is where one idea ends and another begins, or one law ends and another begins, or as somebody said, where bad ideas end and good ideas begin. Mm-hmm. That is in the opinion of the beholder, of course, but there are borders in which, very bad ideas were limited and very good ideas were embraced. Mm-hmm. Our country has certain ideas that, for the most part, we think are very good ideas. Mm-hmm. And asking our government to enforce the laws that they themselves wrote is not out of line. In fact, it's to be expected. It's a right and just thing to do. So there are a number of things here so these values can sort of clash. Mm-hmm. Here's what I want to say. We can live in the tension and yet believe that our country should have borders, and that there should be a controlled and administrated process to immigration. Yeah. That is not an extreme position at all. And I would argue that is fair not only to the citizens of this country, but it is also fair to the people who want to immigrate. Mm-hmm. Part of the problem we have gotten into in this current moment, and you can't talk about it without talking about what has happened, is that we have had a tide of illegal immigration. That is, people coming into our country without any kind of due process, without any kind of proper vetting in some cases, any kind of documentation. And here's what happens when that happens. First of all, the people trying to immigrate are being unfairly treated. Mm-hmm. If you want to talk about somebody who's against illegal immigration, talk to somebody who's migrated legally. They will be against it. You know why? Yeah. Because they were standing in a line. Imagine you're standing in a line, Disney World or something. Actually, they do this at Disney World now. But imagine you're standing in a line, and then here's a guy that walks up, and he just walks in. He doesn't have to stand in the line. Mm-hmm. It angers you. Yep. And it angers you not because you're selfish or not because you don't have compassion for the other person, but because it's fundamentally unfair. Yep. You are going through a process that you assume someone put in place for a good reason, and then somebody who doesn't go through that process is able to come in. Yeah. So, first of all, it's unfair to people who want to immigrate. Secondly, it's unfair to the people who are citizens of that country if that amount of illegal immigration has a negative impact on the culture. and it could have a negative impact in crime. It could have a negative impact in the economy. There are a number of ways in which it could have a truly negative impact. That is not saying those people don't matter to God. That is not saying that we should not be loving and gracious and Christ-like to all people. It's saying that we can expect that the government should do its job and make sure there is an appropriate immigration process in this country. And there hasn't been. There's been a huge problem. Now, should there be an appropriate immigration process where a number of people could come into this country? I think so. We have a long history of it, and we have a great economy. There's a lot of things that can be done. And, so there should be a healthy, in my opinion, robust process by which people can immigrate to this country. Should we care about refugees? I think we certainly should care. And one of the ways in which we care, not the only one, might be that we allow a certain number of refugees from troubled places around the world to settle in places in America. But it is also logical to realize there has to be a number on that. It's not going to be perfect, but somebody's got to say, this is how many refugees we can resettle without harming other people or having a negative impact either on the refugees or the citizens of this country. So the whole idea that a country has borders and has a process, how many people can immigrate, how many people can be resettled as refugees, is not an unchristian or uncompassionate conviction. It's a good conviction. And in fact, I would argue it is compassionate. It is compassionate for those who want to immigrate and for the citizens who are here. And government should do its job. And what is happening now is that we are seeing an administration trying to fix a problem that has gone on for a long time. And therefore, there are going to have to be some hard choices. We're going to hear some stories about families that are going to tear our hearts out, frankly. If you've got a heart, and we're going to say, oh, not them. And I understand it's going to be hard. But it is not, and I hope we proceed with wisdom and kindness even where there needs to be kindness. But it's not an extreme position, and it's certainly not an anti-Christian position to say the government needs to do its job. I need police officers in this county to do their job. You do too. Your family does. I want them to arrest the bad guys. There are people who engage in criminal conduct, and the reason we have a sheriff's department, I need them to stop those guys. You know why? Because I have grandchildren who live here. You have children. I don't want rapists walking around on the streets. I don't want violent people walking around the streets. I wish they weren't there. I grieve for the situations in their families that are caused, and even I can show compassion for them at times. How did they get here? What happened to them? They were hurt. Now they're hurting others. And yet at the same time think, I'm grateful. I can say to the sheriff, you need to do your job. And so to somebody who thinks this is a contradiction of Christian values, it is not. I would say to the sheriff, if he were sitting here, I've met the sheriff, he's a nice guy, I would say, Sheriff, in the plan of God, you need to do your job. Do the sheriffing. Do it well. I hope you're a compassionate man, but here's what I really need to know. I need to know that you're going to enforce the law. Please do the job that you've been called to do. That's what God wants you to do. You be the sheriff. Now, I'll be the church. Okay? It's not my job to go enforce the law, and I'm not saying I would circumvent the law, because I wouldn't. We need to cooperate with the law. But what I'm saying is, as a Christian, can I show compassion to people? Can I help people in troubled situations? Absolutely.